So my name is Tereza Jermanová. I'm assistant professor at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at the Charles University, and it's my pleasure to introduce and chair this discussion today on the topic of religion as a source of resilience in the times of geopolitical crisis. What we'll be discussing today will be questions such as how religion can bring resilience to communities in times of geopolitical crises, and what are some practical and perhaps, practical and effective interventions that faith-based organizations can make in helping people to adapt to crisis solutions. But let me first, before we get to the debate, introduce the distinguished speakers that are here with us today. And I'll be started with Tomáš Halík, who is a professor of sociology at Charles University, and he is also the president of the Czech Christian Academy. And I should begin by saying that I don't have the time in introducing the panel, unfortunately, to make justice to his life and career. To Czech audience, he will be well known, probably also to the international audience, but I will limit myself to saying just a few very brief things. Under the communist regime, Professor Halík was denied the possibility of an academic career, but he was ordained priest and thereafter worked in underground church. And he was also a close associate of former president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. And just to give you a taste of his work and of his published work, he wrote a book in 2009 titled Patience with God, which was also which received the prize for the best European theological book in the same year. Our next speaker will be Mirjam Künkler, who is based at the Institute for Advanced Legal Studies in Netherlands. She is a highly prolific author who has published numerous books around themes of religion and Islam in particular, also merging the focus on Islam with constitutionalism, but not only that. Just a brief overview of what she's written. Her book includes the book A Female Religious Authority in Shia Islam, which came out last year with Edinburgh University Press, and A Secular Age Beyond the West, which came out a few years ago with the Cambridge University Press. And I'm very much looking forward to her forthcoming book on the rule of law in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our next speaker then is Mr. Ermal Bega, who is Orientalist and cultural researcher and executive director of the Albanian Center for Oriental Studies. And in 2020, his book came out titled A Handbook of the Contemporary Albanian Muslim Youth and Society. So you have an idea what he's working on. And our very last speaker is Dr. Aleš Weiss, who teaches at the Prague Center for Jewish Studies at the Faculty of Arts at the Charles University, and also he teaches at law schools of Prague, and he focuses mainly on Jewish intellectual history. So this is just a quick overview of our panels and of the themes that they might speak about, and may I ask Professor Halík to begin. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we meet at the end of the most difficult and dangerous year in modern history. The threats of devastating environmental consequences of climate change and the pandemic of infectious diseases have been joined by changes in a global moral climate with fatal consequences for international political, diplomatic, economic, and cultural relations. We stand on the threshold of the new epoch in world history. The events of this year are changing the geopolitical map of the world. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not just a local war, but an open and devastating attack on the architecture of international security that has been difficult to build since the end of the Second World War. The world has long underestimated the dangers of Russian expansionism. Russia has long been in a situation of economic, demographic, and moral crisis. The Putin's government, terrified that a spark of desire for freedom and democracy that had inflamed the color revolutions in the post-communist states, including the post-Soviet republics, will eventually spill over into Russia and lead to the fall of the dictatorship of corrupt oligarchs, has offered the Russian people the drug of nationalism, the dream of the restoration and expansion of the former Soviet and Russian empires, the mad dream of world domination, to which there is only one road: the war. The cynical rhetorics used by Putin is something that the world has not heard since Hitler and Goebbels. It is newspeak in the style of George Orwell's novel 1984. The truth is called a lie, and the lie is called the truth. The victim, the aggressor, and the aggressor, the victim. The current Russia is violating all rules of international law and cannot be expected to respect any treaties and agreements in the future. Russia is trying to win many anti-democratic regimes around the world to its side. If the West fails to stop the Russian genocide of Ukraine, it would encourage not only the Russian terrorist state, but all dictators and aggressors around the world. Our country has a warning experience when the West sacrificed our country, the Czechoslovak Republic, to Hitler in the last century, thinking that this compromise would save the world peace. This naivety was a tragic mistake. What is happening now in Ukraine is not a local war. It is one on the decisive battles of ongoing Third World War. Politicians, diplomats, military experts, economists, lawyers, opinion makers, and humanitarian institutions face a flood of new concrete tasks. Will economic pressure alone succeed in stopping Russian expansion and prevent the threat of nuclear war? We are following the news from the battlefields in Ukraine with great concern. However, an equally important front in this war is the public opinion in Russia, manipulated by propaganda, and the public opinion in the democratic world. Madeleine Albright once said that a war with terrorism is not only a war of weapons, but also a war of ideas. I said at the beginning that one of the signs of the times is change in global moral climate. In this time of many threats and crises, humanity urgently needs social capital, sources of hope and solidarity. This brings us to the topic of our meeting. Throughout history, the world religions have been a source of moral strength. Schools on how to overcome egoism personal and group egoism, how to manage instincts, especially the instinct of aggression, how to live together in peace and justice. Today, however, when this role would be sorely needed, the world's great religions find themselves in a crisis of credibility. Religious communities are often part of the problem rather than part of the solution. The largest Christian church, my own Roman Catholic Church, has been badly damaged by scandals of abuse of power and authority by the clergy. Pope Francis speaks of the disease of clericalism. The moral authority of Islam has been severely discredited by the extremists who misuse religious symbols and rhetorics to justify violence. Fundamentalists, zealots, and bigots use religious energy to build walls and gulfs of hatred. This year, together with two colleagues from Germany and Austria, I initiated an appeal to religious leaders, which was soon joined by several thousand believers and religious representatives from several continents. It was a call to overcome mutual rivalry and to accept a common responsibility for shaping a just society, to transform the process of globalization into a process of cultural communication and sharing. We published it on the eve of Pope Francis's historic meeting with the leaders of world's religions in Kazakhstan. I consider Pope Francis to be a man of great prophetic visions, which needs to be further thought out and implemented in order to become an impetus for the transformation of our world. His effort for synodal reform of the Catholic Church can be an inspiration not only for the Catholic Church. The world needs synodality, a common journey, sharing ideas and experiences. His encyclical Fratelli Tutti may be as relevant in the 21st century as the Declaration of Human Rights was for the 20th century. His idea of the Church as a field hospital can also inspire other religious communities to not only remain in splendid isolation from the contemporary world, but to help wherever people are hurt. The mission of the hospital includes diagnosis, therapy, strengthening of immunity, and rehabilitation. All this is needed in our world. We need the spiritual diagnosis of our time, building immunity system against populism, nationalism, fundamentalism, and extremism, and work on reconciliation and healing the wounds of the past. We can derive the name for religion, religio, from the verb religare, to reconnect, and see religion as an integrative force in society. It was the social role of religions in the past. I suspect that the religion in the future will be more akin to the meaning of the verb relegere, to reread, relecture. It will offer a new hermeneutic, a more profound spiritual reading of its holy scriptures, and the signs of the times, of events in society and culture. Our time, this time of pain and suffering, is also a time of new challenges and hopes. Crisis is always a new opportunity. Let us think together how to fulfill these challenges. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And can I ask Professor Künkler whether she can start?
I wish also to address the issue of intra-cultural and intra-faith dialogue and respect for pluralism, because in many ways that, of course, is a requirement for interfaith respect. Now, I've written much in the past about the role of Islam in a positive manner in aiding democratic transition, for example, in Indonesia, where the Islamic organizations were key in toppling an authoritarian government in the late 1990s, and where the key leaders of the transition, both the president and the speaker of parliament, who initiated all sorts of important constitutional changes, were Islamic leaders themselves. The same can also be said about Islamic leaders in Senegal, another electoral democracy in the Muslim world, where the marabouts, the Islamic Sufi mystical leaders, play a key role in collaborating with the state in social welfare programs, in family planning programs, and where they have also repeatedly called for the importance of accepting non-Muslim citizens of Senegal as equal, having equal political and social rights, which of course is key to democratic theory. So I do not at all come from the perspective of doubting that Islamic theology and Islamic law can have a very important role to play in building up democratic societies. But interreligious tolerance, of course, also implies intra-religious tolerance, the tolerance for plurality within Islam. And so this is what I wish to address today, because there's an acute need to do so, particularly because originally a speaker also from the Iranian embassy was scheduled to speak here at the conference today. Now, Iran has seen protests since mid-September, when Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police, allegedly for not veiling properly. Since then, more than 1,000 people have been killed by security forces, including more than 100 children. More than 18,000 people have been imprisoned. Estimates suggest that the real numbers are much higher, however, because arrests and killings are underreported, and this particularly in the Sunni minority areas of Kurdistan and Baluchistan. In Kurdistan, where Amini hailed from and where protests have been particularly sustained, several cities have been locked down by security forces and communication services have been suspended. We simply do not know how many people, including children, may have been killed, injured, and arrested there. Now, the first protesters have been tried and sentenced in Iran. Young men in particular have been charged with muharebe, which is the Islamic term for warring against God. 2 have been hanged so far, 1 last week and 1 this week. But what does muharebe mean precisely? In which context is it used in the Quran and in Islamic jurisprudence? Who, according to Islamic law, can be charged with engaging in muharebe, in warring against God? This is important to understand not only for reasons of Islamic law, but also of political theory. It is important to understand whether you are a Muslim or not, because Muslims live in societies around the world today. What will you say when you are confronted with the argument that allegedly Islamic law considers dissenters as illegitimate, that they need to be punished, and if necessary, by death? What actions against a government are legitimate and which ones are not? How can one express dissent? Where's the line drawn between loyal and illoyal opposition? And what opposition precisely does Islamic law permit? Now, 2 categories are central in this regard. The Quran and Fiqh distinguish between dissenters as bari and as muharib, so those who are charged with muharebe, warring against God. What are the differences between these 2 concepts? Bari is the term used in the Quran for transgression. It means someone who transgresses, a rebel taking up arms. If someone merely criticizes the government in a speech or in writing, that person is not considered bari. A requirement is that the person is prepared to use arms. It is someone who does not accept to pledge allegiance to the state, someone who does not pay taxes, or rebels against the state with arms. The Reichsbürger, who were arrested last week in Germany, would theoretically fall into this category. They do not accept the legitimacy of the state, they refuse to pay taxes, and they collected arms to organize an insurgency. In Islamic law, before someone is tried and punished for being an insurgent, a bari, one must debate. One must argue with them and put effort into persuading them to give up their stance. If the bari insists on his or her rejection of the political order, they need to be tried and punished. But ideally, a compromise will be reached because the bari is a Muslim and his Muslimness or her Muslimness is not being questioned. In the Quran, the discussion of bari appears in the following way in verse 49:9. If two groups of believers, this is a quote, if two groups of believers fight, you should try to reconcile them. If one of them is clearly oppressing the other, fight the oppressors until they submit to God's command. Then make a just and even-handed reconciliation between the two of them. God loves those who are even-handed. End of quote. If two factions of Muslims act to kill and confront one another, if they war with one another, Muslims are required to try to find a compromise between them. Now, a muharib, by contrast, which is what many protesters in Iran are charged with in Iranian courts, is someone who undermines security of society without an ideological disagreement. A muharib is a gangster, a criminal. A muharib's actions are driven by personal gain and banditry. The Quran refers to thieves and armed bandits as muharib. A muharib has acted against the security of the people based on personal interest and not against the political regime based on political theory. A muharib will be punished severely, including with the death penalty. His Muslimness is being questioned because he's accused of waging war against God. So he does not enjoy the benefits in criminal law that are afforded to Muslims, such as the bari. A muharib's property can be confiscated. His family can be persecuted as well if they try to protect him. All of that is not true of someone who's accused of being a rebel, a bari. The Quran says in chapter 5:33-34 about the muharib, quote, "Those who wage war against God and his messenger and strive to spread corruption in the land should be punished by death, crucifixion, the amputation of an alternate hand and foot, or banishment from the land. A disgrace for them in this world and then a terrible punishment in the hereafter, unless they repent before they are overpowered. In that case, bear in mind that God is forgiving and merciful." I will not speak more about this condition of repentance, but it has been covered extensively in more recent writings of Islamic law, and it is always a very important category before punishing anyone to give repeatedly the opportunity to repent, and therefore to receive only mild punishment. Like a bari, a characteristic of a muharib is that he or she is armed. To quote back to Iranian leaders today, the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini affirmed in his writing Tahrir al-Wasila a view that accords with that of the majority of Islamic jurists. He, quote, "Muharib is someone who takes up arms to scare people or spread corruption in the land. Thus, a primary characteristic of a muharib is this: he is armed. If someone expresses dissent in society without arms, force, and intimidation, that person is not muharib," end of quote. So it directly contradicts the application of this category today in Iranian courts. How much more time do I have? Okay, good. Yeah. The former head of the judiciary in Iran, Ayatollah Shahrudi, who was the most expert and distinguished jurist of all the heads of the judiciary in Iran until today, he ruled during mostly the Khatami period, the reformist period in the late 1990s and 2000s. He confirmed the requirement of being armed for people in the opposition to fall into the categories of bari or muharib. In an article titled, "Who is a muharib and what is muharaba?" Shahrudi proved that if someone only uses words to criticize, or in the language of the state to corrupt society, that person does not count as a muharib, and a muharib is exclusively someone who upsets the security of society with arms. Quote, "It is necessary to clarify that the two concepts of bari and muharib do not include peaceful political opposition. and Muharrab is in the category of terrorist and gangster, while Bari is in the category of rebel, regime changer, or insurgent. Bari and Muharrab are completely different categories from peaceful political opposition, end of quote. In general, one cannot consider a political opponent as a Quranic Muharrab or Bari. If someone is in opposition to a government, regardless whether this government is considered just or unjust, that person, and if that person has not taken up arms, then the person cannot be tried as either a Bari or a Muharrab. Now, what conclusions are we to draw from this? I think considering political circumstances, 3 jump out. First, the way in which an Islamic government, such as the government of Iran, prosecutes its protesters today defies even criminal law categories based on the Quran. If the Iranian judiciary sentences its protesters for allegedly having waged war against God, it does not follow Islamic law, but its own political logic. Second, it is important to clarify that the concepts of Bari and Muharrab do not include peaceful political opposition. It is relevant not only in Iran, but also other Islamic countries applying Islamic criminal criteria or criminal law, such as Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Sudan, and many others. Finally, one must also be clear that there is no strong notion of political opposition in classical Islamic law and jurisprudence. No strong notion. That is why Islamic reformist theologians and jurists are working hard to deduce rights of political, peaceful opposition from other sources other than Quran and Sunnah. The most prominent Iranian religious philosopher, Mohammad Mujtahid Shabestari, has argued that Muslims have often in their own past based aspects of political order on sources other than their religion. And while this has been a widespread practice, and of course is also so the case today, it must be formally recognized by Islamic jurists throughout the Muslim world. Many aspects of contemporary political orders in the Muslim world are not based on Quran and Sunnah, and it has to be formally recognized. The leading Iranian reformist jurist, Mohsen Kadivar, has explicitly argued that Sharia must be updated to bring it in line with liberal democracy, and where this appears impossible, Muslim jurists must be prepared to abrogate it. It must be possible for Muslims to accept the right of political opposition and dissent without being accused of violating their own religious law. For the sake of the political opposition in Iran, but also elsewhere in the Muslim world, and indeed for all societies in which Muslims live in the West and East, this is a contemporary imperative. Reformist Muslim thinkers have provided the arguments. Now they need political vehicles through which to make these arguments accepted by the majority. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our next speaker is Mr. Ermal Bega.
I'm pleased to be in the city of Prague for this conference. And my topic is the role of religion in creating a better social life for all humanity, and how can Islam be part of it. I will start my speech by mentioning one verse from the Holy Quran in which the Almighty Allah or God says, "O mankind, fear your God, who created you from a single being and created its mate of the same kind, and spread from those two many men and women." Voltaire, the French writer and historian, once said, "If God did not exist, we should invent him." This message clearly shows that God, the messengers of God, and the divine path are so important for the life of a human being. Religions in general, being monotheistic or polytheistic, and Islam in particular, have given so much importance to the education of each individual by knowing themselves as creation of God, praising Him, and being guided how to live a better life with themselves, with their family, their neighbors, and the society at large. A divine faith such as Islam, but also other divine faiths such as Judaism and Christianity, do not have as their basis the harm or damage of oneself or others, even to those who do not believe like us. If a divine faith were like that, even I myself, who am speaking here in front of you, will not agree to believe in such a God and such a faith, just as I agreed to be a Muslim believer. The same God, who is the same for all divine religions, according to me, in any divine text and at any time does not advise any human being in this world to do something bad that is harmful to himself or another innocent human being. Therefore, religion and divine beliefs have always brought justice by properly implementing and conveying the message of the Creator, who is one and the same for all people. At least this is how Islam accepts it. Islam, with its divine teachings in this respect for all Muslims, has always been the only source for a quick solution to life's difficulties, trying to provide solutions to any problem or individual or social life, being considered as the best system for our daily life. Thus, if a good individual is created based on divine principles, then a good family will also be created. If a good family is created, then a good society will be created. If a good society was created, surely all mankind will be good. Of course, the latter is impossible in the world we live in, for the reason that this is how human society has been created in this world. Religions in general, and Islam in particular, have been revealed by the Creator through many different prophets or messengers, only to fundamentally change for the better the societies of those communities where they lived. Since God gave free will to people to live as they want, but of course human nature unfortunately leans towards what is bad and forbidden. Therefore, religion influences and heals the society by imposing rules on people that regulate their lives and are for their benefit. This is also about peace between people with different political, religious, and racial beliefs. Islam, in this case, since its beginning, has given great importance to peace, so that when two Muslims meet each other, they must greet each other with the expression, Assalamu alaikum, may peace of God be upon you. And this is something you can listen everywhere among Muslim communities, wishing each other peace. Various international meetings, like the one we are participating in now, which are carried out nowadays in the name of peace, in most cases were and are just, I consider them as a show, and many times we have proven and witnessed that immediately after many such meetings, various wars have already started. Why did it happen, and why is this happening? I think that such meetings for world peace, here I speak in general, take place without a soul and without religious leaders, and thus are destined to fail and go against peace itself. I think today's societies suffer a lot from a moral nutrition within them. One of the most famous Islamic principles is know yourself, and the one who knows himself has already known God. Such sayings make the individual and the society to meditate more on self-knowledge and then come to the conclusion that this kind of peace without oneself is loved by God and religion. And if we know how to heal ourselves after meditating and knowing it well, then we will automatically understand that religious principles are exactly what keep the individual, society, and on all humanity on the divine right path. And in what is best for us, as God never advised us for doing wrong. In modern times, there is a lot of talk that the creation of civil society through the establishment of various national or international institutions and foundations, whether religious-based organizations or not, will also change the course of bad policies of what powerful individuals, some clans, or powerful states who are interested in starting wars and conflicts. Civil society is considered by some theoretically as being free and independent. For this, I am very skeptical, as I have different experiences from the so-called civil society in my own country, Albania, where the organization that I founded and lead in Albania is also part of the Albanian Muslim Society, and later part of even Analin Foundation as well. But not directly on a religious basis, my organization, I mean, but certainly Islam has been a great impetus for all contributions to culture, literature, and science through various publications and studies we have done so far. Many of the organizations of civil society which are based on religion, I think that in most cases they are dependent on the economic side or even for their activities from individuals, foundations, politicians, or different embassies. This kind of action certainly does not give them any leeway. To change the situation so that those religious-based organizations can really help with activities for the benefit of peace for all people, as religion itself actually requires, whether in times of peace or in times of war and conflicts, a review of the purpose for which those organizations were opened must first be made. The religion itself, Islam in particular, is completely against war, violence, and Islam gives importance to the divine education of children even before they are born. In this way, a Muslim believer is educated with the respect and knowledge to live in peace with himself, his parents, family members, neighbors, society, and all mankind. This is one of the miracles of Islam as a divine religion, which precedes evil before it is done. True believers in God, as well as religious associations, must walk in this path. I think that just as it is a duty of an individual to live in peace with himself and others, so it is a duty of religious-based organizations to help people in a state of war in order to seek peace for all. Today in the world, in addition to the wars that are happening in some corners of the world, there are many other wars that have already happened and are happening in other countries, where for their pacification, I think that religious-based organizations, in addition to politicians, officials and rulers, must contribute to it. First of all, here I will advise that such religious organizations, as leaders and collaborators, must gather near themselves believers, righteous and sincere people, so that the divine message to help people before, during, and after wars and conflicts has as much benefit by educating them and trying to live in peace with themselves and others. Alija Izetbegović, the former president of Bosnia, at the inaugural session of Bosnian parliament in 1996, after the war in Bosnia, said, quote, "There are no bad people in the world, there are only bad leaders. Those who are responsible for the tragedy of Bosnia will have to answer for that, sooner or later, both in front of God and in front of the people. Nobody will be able to avoid that responsibility. I think the same goes for every government in the world that has created and wants to create wars. One of the most practical and important interventions that faith-based organizations can play, I believe, would be the influence they can exert on evil leaders and governments around the world." I'm finishing, I'm done. around the world so that their people and others feel secure before any conflict starts, but also during and after it. Peace today has become fragile everywhere in the world, creating many hotbeds of war. I am completely convinced that this state of affairs in general did not come from religious leaders at all, at least in the case of Muslim ones. On the contrary, it came from non-religious officials and politicians, as well as those who did not want and do not want religion. However, there have been and are precisely many leaders, and especially religious leaders, completely convinced that God's divine and peace-loving principles, who have been headmen to the search for reduction of bloodshed and the search for peace of different people, both in the past and today. There are also many organizations, such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Annalyn Foundation, of which Albanian Center for Oriental Studies has been a part of it since 2009, which have made and still make a great contribution to interfaith and intercultural relationships, just as they organize this meeting in which we are participating today. But there is another way for which civil society and religious-based national and international organizations can learn and through which they can contribute to peace. That way is through what is known as cultural diplomacy. By this, we mean that cultural diplomacy may best be described as a course of action which are based on and utilized the exchange of ideas, values, traditions, and other aspects of culture or identity, whether to strengthen relationships, enhance social cultural cooperation, promote national interests, and beyond. This can be easily applied by teaching different individuals and associations to do different trainings on cultural diplomacy, on how to reach the path of peace even before entering into war conflict. In addition, communication between cultures had been divided based on religion, culture, social, and political differences within societies can again be activated. Since its beginning, being a divine religion and belief also announced as a system of life in the world by God Himself, Islam has also known how to address its message to humanity in the best acceptable way. So even in this matter, God and religion ask all people to care for the lives of others, even when they belong to a different culture, faith, political belief, or social position. While Prophet Muhammad has been the best example of humanity in uniting people without such differences. For this, once the most important message of the Prophet Muhammad regarding how religion affects the unity of people is, a real Muslim is the one for whose strong and hence other people are secure, and a true believer is the one to whom people trust their lives and possessions. I'm done. Islam advises very clearly how societies can be united based on divine principles, where in the Holy Quran it is said, and hold firmly to the rope of God, in relation with God, all together, you people, and do not become divided. And remember that favor of God upon you when you were enemies, and He brought your hearts together, and you became, by His favor, brothers. In this way, the unity and not the division of mankind, and thus peace for all, can be achieved when righteous people and rulers strive to apply righteously the divine principles of religion, which are for the benefit of all mankind. Here I close my speech with a quote from George Bernard Shaw about the Savior of humanity, as he called Prophet Muhammad. I have always held the religion of Muhammad in high estimation because of its wonderful vitality. And it is the only religion which appears to me to possess that assimilating capacity to the changing face of existence which can make itself appeal to every age. My only wish and prayer is that may the divine peace of God be upon you all present here in this conference, and to all humanity in every time and age. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can I ask our last speaker, Dr. Aleš Weiss?
It's off. It's on. Okay, great. I would like to thank to the organizers also. And when I started to think about the topic of this panel, which was how can religion bring resilience to communities in times of crisis, so I looked at the bookshelf of my library. I wanted to get some inspiration if I see any interesting Jewish thinker who has something to say about that. And I have to say that I realized that most of the books I saw were in some way reacting to major crises in Jewish history. So if resilience is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, stress, as the American Psychological Association has it, so there's a long tradition of resilience in Judaism. So I think today that I speak here more as a member of the Jewish community than as somebody involved in the academy. But I would like to share some thoughts which I personally think are or represent, let's say, assets of Judaism in dealing with major crises. So I want to talk about two key values, which, in my opinion, have been repeatedly helping to make Jewish life meaningful after major crises and tragedies. So one of them is community, the value of community, and the other is something I would call a culture of study. And I am aware of the fact that we share it together very often, but at least from the Jewish perspective, these two have been crucial in dealing with significant turbulences both on individual and communal level, both of them. So when I say the word community, I have also on mind many other values which are dependent on it, like mutual responsibility and social action. And of course, one of the reasons for a close social cohesion in Judaism is obviously the fact that for most of the history, Judaism was a minority culture. And helping other fellow Jews was vital for the survival of the community. But there is more to it. It's not only that. I think that once people really develop this culture of mutual responsibility and compassion and see it as a religious value, so it extends very often. It extends beyond the borders of the community. So the power of community stands out, especially in the moments of crisis. And it's a kind of metrics which helps to recruit and support people of various talents and put them together in order to be more efficient in reaching goals from which many can benefit. And these two recent crises, which were already mentioned, I think prove it very nicely. The community does a lot of, it is a great advantage because the fact that religious communities are organized on the grounds that transcend social, economic, political matters, and in Judaism I would even say religious matters, because this type of ethno-cultural religious community often transcends also religious matters. So it really provides us a safe space for sharing ideas without need to adjust our languages, to translate it, to explain ourselves. And so I think communities are really, really important. Of course, we should be always able to leave it freely and to come back. And certainly intellectual ghettos and tribal mentality are not something what a healthy religious community should strive for. And I think we should be able to metabolize, I would use the word somehow, and develop values of diversity and see really diversity as a blessing for humanity. And I think religious communities have to do it if they want to be on the vanguard among contemporary moral voices. I don't think they have much other chances. Their credibility is at stake if it's not done. So the second key value I want to talk about, which have been very helpful in Judaism, is a culture of study. And I would like to give it a bit more space, because I think it's maybe less obvious. And I don't mean the sheer fact that in Judaism study is a really important value, one of the most important values. But I mean something which Michael Fishbane, a contemporary Jewish thinker, calls hermeneutical imagination. The fact that the narratives, laws, cultural, theological values are constantly being reshaped as consequences of our experiences. So it's a very dynamic and creative process which requires profound imagination and courage. So, like in other traditions, and I have on my especially Islam now, of course there's an element of stability. This process is grounded in the language and images of our holy texts. And we do take care, take a good care of keeping the integrity of the linguistic framework, but these images are always infused with new meanings, which are being incorporated into the reservoir of our traditions. So in Judaism, Torah is, it is a text, but it's not only a text. It lives in interpretation, and I would say that it lives mainly in interpretation. It's like a live consciousness of an interpretive community, which has the text at its center. And I think this is valid also not only in Judaism. So we again and again reinterpret our texts and our experiences and our views in order to make them meaningful for our lives. And I don't think that this meaning is inherent in the situations. It's thanks to our willingness and ability to make them meaningful, to accept them as part of our lives, whether we like them or not, and to situate ourselves vis-a-vis these experiences, to make them part of our complex narrative about ourselves. And crises are, of course, main triggers of this process of reinterpretation. And humans are hermeneutical beings. And in Judaism, we use this fixed textual framework as a springboard for recreating the meaning structures again and again. So to put it simply, maybe we spend most of our lives telling stories, and I really like what Rabbi Rami Shapiro said, that the quality of our lives depends to a great degree on kinds of stories we tell. And so this ability to retell our stories and again and again is a great asset. And we even don't need to insist on one version of the story. So there's another aspect of classical rabbinic hermeneutics I would like to mention here, and that's the culture of disagreement, machloket. It's a culture of really disagreement, that the plurality of opinions, practices, and narratives is a good thing. Disagreement is holy because it puts us into conversation and helps us gain deeper understanding. In rabbinic texts, this type of disagreement is called disagreement for the sake of heaven. And there's a famous passage in the Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Eruvin, where two schools named after two great scholars, Shammai and Hillel, argue about the law, and after 3 years, there comes a God's voice. It's an agada, it's a story, and the God's voice says, "These and those are the words of living God. You both are right." But it goes on and says, "However, the law is according to the school of Hillel." And then rabbis ask, "Why is it so?" And they say, "The reason is that the Beit Hillel, the school of Hillel, treated all the arguments of the Shammai school with respect. They would teach them, they would give them priority, they would take them seriously. That's the reason why the normative behavior was determined by them, and not only the content." Rabbi and Professor David Hartman, from whom I had the privilege to learn, would often say that one important thing about Judaism is that it preserves and engenders perennial, ongoing debates about conflicting values. And sometimes our struggles and disagreements with some traditional values and narratives are the most valuable asset we can gain from them. So during study, which in Judaism traditionally takes place with a study partner, it's a dialogue, it's a debate. And we do it because we want to understand the position of the other. We very often have to change, we have to switch the position with the other, with our study partner, and which means identifying for some time with the position, living their fears, understanding their defensiveness sometimes, all that is very important. Of course, that's an ideal, and I don't think we're there. I don't think we totally internalize those values, but we try. It's an ideal. So despite the fact that the theory is green while the practice is gray very often, I think we should stick to the ideals. We should keep them on mind. So this was one thing, like really learning to see things differently again and again. It's can be a great resource of resilience. Do I have like 2 minutes? One? Okay. Okay, so maybe we can get to the examples later, but there's still one thing I wanted to mention. I think that religions have a great potential to get individual and communally meaningful responses to crisis, because they bind together social, political, ideological, existential, cultural into one bundle. Many other things too, but it's their weakness and it's their strength. It can be for good and it can be for bad too. So it's a very powerful tool, and I think it's on us. Like obviously, it's on us. Like how we use that tool. Okay, great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for all the speakers. The organizers warned me that we're running out of time, although I should say that our panel started a bit later, so I'm sort of begging. Okay, somebody turned off my microphone. Might have been me. But I'm begging them to give us a minute, just in case there are questions in the audience. I think the panel was really interesting in giving us an idea that religion can act as, or has a great potential. It happens again, and I didn't do it. Anyway, that religion has a great potential to be a tool for resilience, but sometimes, perhaps often, this does not happen. There are many questions that stem from this panel, but I will give the opportunity, maybe first before I ask any question, in case we don't have time for that, I would like to give the opportunity to the audience whether they would like to ask any question. So if you can please identify yourself. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I'm from Embassy of Iran. Just as a comment to what one of the speakers said, Mrs. The name was Miss Mirjam. What is it?
Künkler. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you make your comment brief, please, as well? Thank you.
Just, I want to say that the objective of this conference is cultural and religious. It is not political. Unfortunately, this speaker turned goals or aims of such good conference to political issues. And they said some accusations about the Iranian, policy. So it is not, such conferences is a platform to close nations, to close the people, not to separate them, and to misuse it as, a political tool to have your, comments. I'm sorry for such wrong remarks by this speaker, which unfortunately, she couldn't, her remarks, her speech was against the objectives of the conference. What she said about the judiciary in Iran is wrong, and of course I'm not a specialist to tell you all about the judiciary system in Iran. we have invited one Iranian specialist to take part in this conference, but unfortunately he was rejected. So I'm again sorry for such wrong.
Thank you so much. If you could, I can't speak. If you could just identify yourself quickly.
I'm Deputy Head of Iranian Mission in Prague.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I understand perfectly your point, and all religions are peace-loving, and you will find in all religions wise people who treat each other with respect and who say, you should have exactly the same right as I do. It doesn't matter what gender you have, it doesn't matter what religion you have, it doesn't matter what culture you have. You find that in all religions, in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, in Hinduism, also among secular people who are agnostic. But you cannot talk about interfaith and intrafaith relations by bracketing political issues out. I'm sorry to say, what we see, Ukraine is very close to Prague. The crimes we see being committed in Ukraine are often, unfortunately, very similar to what is committed in Iran. And you can say I'm misrepresenting the picture, but everybody here has access to newspapers. We are all politically enlightened. We can all read, we can all see, we can all talk to Iranians in Iran and abroad. And more than 80,000 people have been imprisoned. Thousands have been killed. I understand you are from the embassy of Iran, you have to represent the interests of your country. Every professional has to do that, I understand it. But this is also an academic conference that is committed to the truth. And we cannot bracket out the truth and the fact that people are being killed. Peaceful protesters are being killed, children are being killed, only to stand up for their rights and for others to have the same right. And that's also part of interfaith and intrafaith relations. We also have to talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be our last question. So if you could make it brief and...
Thank you. My name is Miroslav Kocur. I'm a theologian from Slovakia. My microphone too. And about the possibility and potential of religion, I would suggest one observation. I see that there is a difference between spirituality, personal spirituality, and then organized religion. I liked very much presentation of Mr. Ermal Bega from Albania, and this is a really idealistic picture of good interpretation of religion which brings all nice things to personal life. But on the other hand, there is somebody who is using these ideas and misusing, or I would suggest to use less polarized expression, instrumentalize religion to his, her own needs. So when we think about it, I don't need the answer because it's not really a question, it's the question which I'm posing also to myself. Where is the difference and where is the possibility to reunite spirituality to the religion of world religions? Because world religions, they have, and we have to admit it, and it was in previous discussion, that religion has always political impact. And this political impact comes from the spirituality. And I know that as a Christians or Jews and Muslims, we see that our religion is the best, that our spirituality is the best. It's natural because they are our lives. So please, if you have the courage, touch this point. Where is the connecting between spirituality and religion? And I will appreciate that answer for myself. And I would suggest that this will be useful also in that contribution of interfaith and intrafaith dialogue.
Thank you so much for your question. So I'll ask our speakers whether anyone would like to respond. We have to make this brief. I'd say that not only religious orders have their political implications, but also secularist orders have their political implications. Yeah, there's no space really to talk about that right now, but maybe we'll touch that later.
Thinking as he's waiting an answer by me. I can just say, if we take the history of Islam itself, Islam has never been a political. He always used to gather on the desert to invite all diplomats of that world, and he never had any political intention. When he sat with the poor, when he sat with all different politicals from other countries or different religious people, he never had any intention to have any political impact. In this case, it's not like nowadays where we have different Arab states. I'm speaking as an Orientalist. Different Arab states pretending to promote Islam or other non-Arab countries. But Islam, in my opinion, and religion together the people, it's on the basic of Islam and by talking and discussing. And this is a part of what God in the Holy Quran said. All you people, gather together to one word and discuss that there is only one God and we are helping each other. If we take the history of Harun al-Rashid time in 11th century, if I'm not wrong, he used to gather different religious people, different scientists from Muslims, Christians, and Jewish, and he united them only for the sake of God. You be whatever you are, but let's get together in peace, but without any political affiliation. So if you get the point, Islam, in my opinion, I'm saying is just want to gather people without any political affiliation behind that. Thank you.
I don't know, do you hear me? Yes. I think we should be aware of the fact how we use the word religion. The word religion, the way we use it now, is not that old, and it seems to me that sometimes it's also not that functional. I mean, the division between religion and politics is something which, in my opinion, like comes pretty much with the Protestant tradition, and sometimes it simply doesn't work if we apply that division on phenomena like cultures like Judaism, Islam, that's and also some types of Christianity. That's my opinion. And religions, when we use the term the way we conventionally use it, are very complex phenomena, and spirituality is certainly part of it. Again, a pretty much new word in the, I would say, European vocabulary, in the conventional sense we use it now. So it's, I don't know if these definitions and the ways we define these words, if sometimes they are able to convey a more like complex information, I think that's. Sorry.
I would just like to make a brief addition. Even the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, whom I cited, and Ayatollah Shahrudi, the head of the judiciary in the 2000s, would not permit the trial of the protesters today on the basis of muharebe. The application of Islamic criminal law in Iran does not follow its own founding fathers' juristic thought. It's not a political point, it's an Islamic legal point. Perhaps also something that can be discussed within the Iranian embassy. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Sorry, we are running out of time. I'm sorry.
Yes, religion is always incarnated in the two contexts. One context is the inner life of a human person. It is the depth dimension of religion, and it is spirituality. And but the faith, the religion, is also incarnated into the social context and cultural context and political context. It depends how's the relation between these two dimensions of religion, the depth dimension and this outdoor dimension. Yeah? I think this turn from this political misuse of religion could be also to discover the importance of this moral source, which is spirituality, but it's very, very complicated. Complicated question. It's not possible to express it so shortly. This different dimension and different context of the religious faith.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful panel. I'm afraid we have to leave it here, although, of course, it opens a lot of questions that we would wish to discuss further.